Hello, and welcome to episode 35 of TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. I'm Patrick Stemp, and as always, I have Jamie Maltman and Michael Ronn here with me. How you guys doing?
Pretty good. How about you, Patrick?
Excellent. So tonight we're going to be talking about subgenres in science fiction. And before we hit that, we'll talk about our weekend reading. And as always, I start to go left to right on the bottom of my screen. And for some reason, that always seems to be in the same order. So we're going to start with Jamie.
All right. So I believe I was reading the Bone 7 at the time that we did our show.
Yeah.
Give me a second.
Okay.
Sorry, my YouTube just went on. It only went in my head.
That's why you froze.
It was just driving me a little bit nuts hearing Patrick intro us again. So yeah, no, I was at Bone 7. So we read that, enjoyed it as we've enjoyed all of it. We are now into the last chapter of Bone 8, and then we have 9 out of the library, and we have Rose out of the library that we'll read after that. So still enjoying that. They're getting thicker there at the end too. I see this like the final volume's like twice the size, I think. So. It's really like
thicker and darker.
Yeah. So we'll see whether my son complains at all about that. We've also, I read more of that Rogues anthology that I was reading. I actually started beta reading for our former guest, A.T. Schubert, with her upcoming Engine World, not anthology, but her upcoming Engine World novel. So. I don't know if I'm even supposed to say the name, but anyway, she's got one that's dealing with the stuff related to the Ministry of Decorum in the world of the Dream Engine, and so I'm about 60% of the way through that now. And this is pretty early on in the beta reading, so I'm not really going to comment on it. But it's got a bit of a Harry Potterish feel in terms of it's like a student going away to where you'll learn how to be involved in the Ministry of Decorum, or all those related jobs, like the mom in that book. So that's been cool. So that got me away from that Rogues book, and I had a little hiccup with the library, so I had to take it back yesterday. So I did read a few more. It was funny. There was a stretch where, there's a couple that are just not science fiction and fantasy at all. They're just Rogues. Like one about, I don't think I mentioned it last time, right? About stealing band instruments, or had I mentioned that?
No, I don't think so.
Pretty weird, right? Like that was by Bradley Denton. It was called Bad Brass. But there's another one by Scott Lynch, who's someone who wrote the Lies of Locke Lamora, is one of his famous novels that's supposed to be really good, that I haven't gotten around to yet. And that was like a wizards battling in this city politics, but with a whole bunch of really interesting thief wizards that are trying to, I don't know, it was really good. It was called A Year and a Day in Old Theridane, and they were trying to steal a street. That one was a lot of fun. It was one of my favorites that I've read so far. And then because I was going to give it back, I went and found the Neverwhere related story that Neil Gaiman wrote. There's like one of the last few there. So that was How the Marquis Got His Coat Back, about the Marquis de Carabas. So that one is really cool. I enjoyed that a lot. Like, anything pretty much Neil Gaiman does, but that was the one I wanted to make sure I read Neverwhere because I knew I had that short story coming up. I did actually skip the Patrick Rothfuss one so far because I'm just afraid that it's going to have spoilers for the second book, The Wise Man's Fear. And then same thing, the George R.R. Martin novella, even though it's like set 100 years before Game of Thrones, I still am a little spoiler weary there. So I ended up, some of the ones that like drew me into it in the first place, I ended up not reading in the anthologies. So I'll have to get that one back out again sometime. And I've continued to read that Consider the Fork. Still not done it yet. I have been doing some other things at the dinner table rather than reading that, so it's slipping a little bit, but I will catch up on that soon. So yes, it's more just continuing what we're going through, and but then that Amy's book. So that's been my weekend reading.
Okay, cool. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, I had a better week this week than the last two, so that's good. I picked up American Gods again. I'm not that far into where I left off, so we'll.
You got me excited there for a second.
Yeah, I know. It's just horrible, isn't it? But and then I'm also listening to the audiobook for Fiction Unboxed. Amy Schubert sent out an email today, for review copies. So I got a review copy of that, and I'm listening to that, and I'm about a third of the way into it. So I have the Fiction Unboxed book. I just haven't read it.
And that's Simon Whistler narrating, right?
Yeah, it's Simon. Simon,
He does a great job. So.
yeah, he's a great narrator. He did the Write, Publish, Repeat book, which I loved, and so I'm listening to that. And I also read a few stories in an anthology for Lightspeed magazine, which is the science fiction, and I think they're mostly science fiction, but science fiction and fantasy magazine. It's like one of the top magazines in the world, and they did an annual issue after their first year, and it has stories from like I guess the editor's favorite stories from their first year. So Christine Catherine Rush is in it, Nancy Kress, George R. Martin, Orson Scott Card, I think, is in it. I mean, there's just all kinds of heavy hitters in there.
So is that George R. R. Martin? Is that what story is it?
Well, I don't remember the name of it, but it's like a post-apocalyptic alternative history sort of story, and it's got like tones of like counterculture. It's almost like he took the 1960s and made it into an alternative history. So there's a lot of counterculture and nuclear war and all that. Rock and roll.
I wasn't sure if maybe it was that.
I can't remember the name of the story. I think it's called Keith. I don't remember, but
I wasn't sure if maybe it was the sci-fi one that I've read that's set in space and is pretty cool.
No, this one isn't in space. It was interesting. I liked the writing style. I just didn't care too much for the story itself. But a story in there that really did surprise me was Christine Catherine Rush's The Observer. Fantastic short story. Probably one of my favorite science fiction short stories I've read in a while. I mean, just beautifully written. And I read a few other stories in it. Some that were kind of interesting, and some that were like, okay, why is this in the anthology? But it was pretty cool because I haven't read a short story collection in a while, especially for genre fiction. So it was kind of different for me to read. And I've also reread Making a Living as a Writer, or Make a Living as a Writer by James Scott Bell. I don't know if you guys have read that or not, but he's written quite a few nonfiction books on writing and the craft of writing and all of that. And the first half of that book is really good. I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I got a lot of information out of it. The second half, I guess not so good, maybe because I knew a lot of that stuff already, but yeah, so I read that, and then, like I said, I'm getting through American Gods, and I'm also rereading Nick Stevenson's books, Reader Magnets and Supercharge Your Kindle Sales. So I've read them before, but just want to reread them again just to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Cool. And yeah, I like James Scott Bell too. I think he's done a few of the Writer's Digest books on the craft, right?
Yeah. I love James Scott Bell. He's awesome. And I think this book was definitely, I think it was a bestseller for quite a while when it launched. And you can definitely tell why. I mean, it's kind of like him distilled, like he's just teaching you everything that he's learned in the last few decades as a writer, compared to his other stuff, which is more craft oriented. So it was kind of interesting to see him out of that writing craft box and just kind of like a James Scott Bell unplugged. I like that sort of stuff personally.
And you mentioned Nancy Kress too, and of course I think she's written at least one of the Writer's Digest books as well.
Yeah, she has. So that was my week in reading. What about you, Patrick?
Let's see, I finished off Regulation 19 by P.T. Hilton, and so that's the kind of an odd story about a man who is released from prison, kind of with the understanding that he will help the powers that be track down his brother who's missing, and he's been in prison for I think 7 years, and on like a 10-year sentence or something, then he got out early, and a lot's changed since he went away. The town, there's all these strange regulations, and he's warned, you better not break any rules or bad things are going to happen, and so we get to see this new world through his eyes as he's sort of figuring out what the heck is going on. There's this mysterious man who seems to have blown into town and kind of taken things over, and nobody's allowed to leave the town. That's sort of a one of the worst offenses is trying to leave. So so it's good. It's a bit of a mystery, and there's some weird stuff going on. I enjoyed it a lot. And then I read Expatriates by Peter Clines, and that is the sequel to Ex Heroes. So it's a continuation of his story about superheroes, mostly sort of mutant powers that are they've kind of culled together a bunch of survivors, and they're trying to survive the zombie apocalypse together in the what used to be the Paramount Studios lot in Hollywood. And so this book picks up pretty much where the first one ended, and it's a comic book with words, like, I mean, and no pictures, right? That's basically what it is. It's tons of comic book action and superheroes and supervillains, and this one adds in a new layer of the army from an area not too far away. Kind of comes in looking into Los Angeles, looking for survivors, and finds this group and wants to kind of move them all with them back to the base, but they don't really want to leave, and it's cool. It's good enough that I immediately picked up the third book in the series, Excommunication, and I'm reading that one now. I think there's 5 so far, or there's 4, and the 5th one's coming out later this year. So it's really good. Enjoying that a lot. Highly recommended if you like zombies and superheroes, and you don't need the pictures to make it fun. That is my weekend reading. Yeah. So we'll move on to our topic, which is subgenres in science fiction. And so I kind of popped a quick list into the YouTube comments ahead of time, and then Jamie dropped a second list in. I think when we all looked at it, we thought that my list was a little bit short. I pulled my list off of Amazon.ca, so I mean, this is something weird too, where the list of genres really depends on where you look. So, for example, Wikipedia and Amazon for my list both have alternate history listed, and space opera. Wikipedia lists space western as a genre, but Amazon does not. Although it might be on Jamie's list. Jamie pulled his list from the Kindle, right?
Yeah, the U.S. Kindle store.
And is space western listed there? No, it doesn't look like it is. So it's weird. The lists are all just kind of I don't know how they come up with them. It's weird that when you look at like sort of the all books section on Amazon, there's only 9 listed, and then you go to the Kindle, and just taking a quick look at it, there's got to be about 20 there.
Yeah.
So.
And I think it's just, it's been growing over time, right? Like over the past few years, there have been several rounds of subgenre expansions on the different major retailers, and I think it's just, when they see, for Amazon, they got to have a reason, right? So enough people are asking, enough people are interested, enough people have been searching that keyword that they've decided to go that direction, I guess. So.
Yeah, and I guess the other genres might just be more for like sort of the traditionally published, the paperbacks, and they want to keep those simple. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's a whole category system that all the different retailers use.
The BSAC or whatever, right?
BSAC, yeah, that makes it more complicated for them to add different categories. But yeah, I think they do a pretty good job with science fiction compared to fantasy. Looking at this list, I can't really think of a science fiction genre that isn't here compared to fantasy, where there's some stuff that maybe could fall between the cracks,
Yeah. So do we want to maybe take a run through the list?
Sure.
Yeah.
And the one thing I forgot to paste in too is Wikipedia starts with a general. They have 2 categories of science fiction, and they just split that right down the middle into hard versus soft. So I typically, starting at that kind of high level, I think I typically would say that I read softer science fiction. I enjoy hard science fiction, like I would say The Martian, probably it would be hard science fiction. It would have to be. I mean, the research that he did for that book was just amazing. And that's Andy Weir, for anybody who's listening. I was just reading something about one of his readers using the book as a guideline, and I don't know how the heck he did it, but was able to use the information in the book to backdate and figure out when the mission launched from Earth, what year it was. It was like 2036 or something like that. Just insane. I don't know how you would do that, but so that's definitely hard. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I know a few. I honestly can't, off the top of my head, think of any hard science fiction books that I've necessarily ever read. Like really hard science fiction. I know a few, I've gotten to know online a few hard science fiction writers, and it's like the hard science fiction writers and hard science fiction readers are very, tend to be very opinionated and very like interested in their genre and the accuracy and that side of thing. Like, it's kind of like the parallel of the historical, very historical fiction types, except with a lot more science involved. And like I think there's even like some that are calling like engineering hard sci-fi, like trying to even drill deeper to make it be like, no, you must explain this with like even closer to today's technology, or I don't know, that sort of thing. So
I could see it getting a little too, I'm more interested in the story. I'm happy for the author to say, because that's why, like, because faster than light. That's all I need to know.
I'm fine with that too.
I don't mind the hand waving. I prefer it. I'm not a huge hard sci-fi fan. I think it's because a lot of the authors, they just get too wrapped up in the science, and I don't care about the science. I mean, tell a story.
I'm not saying that I would avoid hard science fiction, but if it got to the point where the level of description and the world building was on par with, say, Game of Thrones, then it might get a little too juicy or a little too much technical detail for me. If it's and that's where something like The Martian is great, where it's part of the story and it's woven into the story. You don't get 20 pages of technical details about there's a lot of information about growing potatoes in space,
right?
But it's interesting, and it's told in a way that you don't feel like you're reading a manual.
Right.
Yeah,
as long as the characters shine, right? Like the stories shine, and that it just happens that you're not crossing any of these boundaries of scientific knowledge or whatever, that defines that hard science fiction genre.
Yeah, I would say I've only read 2 hard science fiction books that I've enjoyed. Like, the first one that I loved was The Beam by John B. Trent and Sean Platt. I mean, I think that's a really good example of story-driven hard science fiction. And then another one would be 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. I would consider him a hard sci-fi writer. I mean, maybe some people would disagree, but he does spend like 20 pages talking about the different technical aspects of the Nautilus and how he sails the sea and how Captain Nemo actually was able to build the ship and sail around the world for
and I think
long.
I think you kind of raise an interesting point too, where the hard sci-fi doesn't necessarily have to be how does the faster than light drive work. Right. In the case of The Beam, that's something where and the other book that I know you've read and I have on my list, the one where he's sort of imagining the future. What was that called, Michael?
Oh, not the physics of the future.
Physics of the future.
Yes, physics of the future. So I think that's the same. So they spent a lot of time building the world of the future by imagining, the technology that we have today and how could that grow and change. And so it isn't based on anything that we have today. But yeah, I mean, they had enough detail there that they wrote a whole other book written by one of the characters in the book, explaining all of that history to themselves and then to any readers who cared, right?
Yeah. It's a good example of hard sci-fi, or I guess like Robert Heinlein or all the Golden Age guys of science fiction. I was never really able to get into those that much.
I'll be honest,
Heinlein too dry.
A lot of that's doctor, but anyway, like anyway, whatever you want to say there, Patrick.
I was just going to say, Heinlein is definitely one of those authors that a lot of people love, but he's just never really grabbed me and pulled me into his work. I just always somebody that I want to get back to and want to try again, but anytime I have picked up one of his books, I just can't get into it.
I read Stranger in a Strange Land last year or the year before, and really liked it. So that's the only Heinlein that I've directly read. But of course, one of his other books is actually a really good example for military sci-fi, and one where I've seen the bad adaptation of it, or anyway, it was supposed to be campy, but Starship Troopers. Right? So that's, sci-fi with a very military sort of a setting.
I like the military stuff, like Old Man's War, anything by Scalzi. And I think he's somebody who then kind of maybe is in the middle. He not so hard, but there's definitely some, I think, thought put into that stuff, and Scalzi's just a fantastic author. but he does weird stuff. Like Agent of the Stars is a great one, which is about a gelatinous blob that comes down from space and needs a Hollywood agent to help him figure out how to sort of integrate, basically how to introduce his race to humanity without completely disgusting them, and because he smells and he's a blob kind of thing, and to the military sci-fi and just straight up fun. Fuzzy Nation was a fantastic book, and that was a rewrite of Piper is the last name. An old sort of, I think, shorter book that Scalzi took and sort of rewrote in his own way. That was fantastic. So do we want to hit some of these other genres?
Yeah, let's do it.
There's the big one that jumps out at me, of course, is time travel.
Yeah.
So you've got your Doctor Who, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and I still have one of those sitting on my shelf that I haven't read yet.
Is that the Stephen Baxter one?
Yeah, The Wheel of Ice.
Yeah.
Yes, I
I
have.
really liked.
Excuse me. I think one of my favorite time travel books has got to be Philip K. Dick's Doctor Futurity. That was one I read a year or two ago, and if you want a good introduction to Philip K. Dick as an author, have you guys read any of his works?
No, I haven't.
Philip K. Dick. Well, I started reading that short story collection, and I've read several before I moved on to something else. But I will get back to it because I did like The Wub and various other things that I did there.
Beyond Lies the Wub.
Beyond the Wub.
Yeah, so you could say he's an acquired taste, and I think I saw they're turning The Man in the High Castle into, I want to say, a TV series. I don't think it's a movie. I think it's going to be a show. So that'll be interesting. And
I saw that as an example of actually the alternate history, sort of alternate history sci-fi.
Yep, for sure, he does alternate history quite a bit. He does time travel.
And the premise for that is Germany and Japan won World War II, right?
Right. Yeah. So they are kind of running everything here, and a lot of his works tend to deal with the idea that kind of the world around us doesn't really work the way we think it does, kind of pulling back the veil, and it can get really weird. But he's a fantastic author. I love Philip K. Dick. Just trying to think of some other
alternate history that I read recently was that Robert Silverberg one. What was the name of it? It was like but it was about Rome, and it was basically like, what if Rome never fell? And so it just kept giving the explanations of why it didn't. And it was a series of short stories that went to different sort of seminal moments in Roman history that led to the downturn, and instead something else happened. And like one of them was like it went back as far as, I think they kind of stopped. I don't know. Like there was some stuff that happened with the Jews early on, and like they subjugated the Jews earlier on, and there's and they stopped Christianity really from taking root in the empire, and they eventually colonized North America and stuff like that. So he's very much a sci-fi writer, but taking that approach. So there's nothing fantastical at all, and it actually ended with one where some of the remaining Jews in like the 20th century were trying to launch a rocket to send people to the Promised Land to like have their new Exodus kind of thing. So it was pretty cool. I really enjoyed it. Again, I like Roman stuff, so that was a.
So would you think, we've talked about Jack White's Camelot series. Like, do you think that, and even the one that he's written now with telling the history of William Wallace, do you think that those would fall more under alternate history sci-fi or alternate history fantasy? Because I want to say sci-fi because there's no magic there.
Right. Well, even is the William Wallace one an alternate history, or is it just a historical fiction series that he's working with the details he has?
Yeah, he's working with what he has, and basically recreating conversations that happened behind closed doors in a way
I call that straight up historical fiction, as opposed to the Camelot. Like Camelot one is off the track, conjectural enough that you do make a good case. Like I think it's one of those ones alternate history does straddle the two anyway, and people that like it probably search both. And it probably even cross-links it on Amazon if they're smart, and they tend to be smart.
So what about apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic?
We seem to have at least a couple every month that would fit there, mentioned on the show, right? So.
Well, a couple. So great old one. Of course, we've talked about The Stand, Stephen King. That's a great one. And I would also highly recommend Swan Song. And the author's name escapes me for the moment. But if you're in Goodreads, Jamie, you can probably bring it up pretty quick. So that's a great one where nuclear holocaust happens basically, and it's sort of all about the survivors. And it's got a touch of that, not a touch, it's got a huge part of the sort of the Stephen King. It's not just about people trying to survive nuclear apocalypse. There's also some, I guess you could almost call it sort of more fantasy as well, sci-fi fantasy stuff going on. Bad people coming in and trying to take over what's left of the world and things like that. It's a book, it's a tome, and it's excellent. What else? Post-apocalyptic.
You guys read The Postman by David Brin?
No, I have not.
It's a pretty good book. It's
now is that was made into a movie with
Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner. There you go.
Yeah, it was a horrible movie adaptation.
I think you can assume that because I said it has Kevin Costner in it. But
yeah. I don't know what's better.
That became Waterworld.
No,
that's the post.
Come on.
No, but yeah, the novel itself was really. I mean, it was really good. I enjoyed it. It's about a guy that he's just a regular guy, and he's wandering after a post-apocalyptic disaster, and kind of gets into some strange adventures along the way. And I enjoyed that one. I guess that was like 80s science fiction. So that was, I think he was considered as one of the kind of the forefathers of the post-apocalyptic genre, because not a whole lot of people were really writing those in the 80s. It seems like it really didn't take off until the last 10 years or so.
Have you read?
Although again, you had the movies like the Mad Maxes and stuff back in the 80s, right? Like there was totally that sort of thing. And now they're making a new Mad Max, which was a very loud review in the theater.
Yeah.
Have you read Cormac McCarthy's The Road? I haven't, so I'm wondering.
I haven't. I'm not a big Cormac McCarthy fan, to be honest with you.
I've never read him. I figure that's a good one. I have heard that it's dry.
Yeah. What's the other one he did with the cowboy? I can't think of the name of it. That's the one I read. I'll look for it, but yeah, just his writing style just turns me off. I can't.
No Country for Old Men?
No, it's not No Country for Old Men. I'll look it up. But I mean, I guess some people, he's one of those, you either love him or hate him, And didn't they turn that into a movie too with Viggo Mortensen?
No. Yes, No Country for Old Men. Yeah.
I thought that was the Road. Wasn't?
Oh, maybe I just know I know they turned No Country for Old Men into a movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't read too much of Cormac. I don't know. His writing style, I guess, I have a hard time with no punctuation.
Mm-hmm.
All the Pretty Horses. That's the one.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some other. I mean, post-apocalyptic it's one of those genres where it could really be a genre in and of itself. Because it's not necessarily. I mean, I guess it depends on how hard the author wants to go onto the sci-fi or the fantasy. But it just seems like it's more about the survival rather than the science fiction or even the fantastical elements. And it almost would go into horror in a way.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
I think it's really which flavor do you want, because we could give examples in all three for sure.
Yeah, and post-apocalyptic, of course, isn't even just limited to the science fiction and stuff like that.
Right.
Like if you want a book that I just absolutely loved was 1 Second After, which is about America is attacked by an EMP blast, I guess, and it's about a bunch of survivors living on a mountain, just trying to, with zero contact to the outside world, because of course all of their technology's been fried, and just trying to survive the aftermath of this, having no idea who's been hit, how hard, by whom. That's a really good read. The next one I have on my list for genres is one of my favorites, which would be space opera. And the first one that comes to mind for me there would be the Leviathan Wakes, The Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. And that's book, I think we're up to book 5 on that. It's a fantastic series. And that's another one that's being turned into a miniseries, I think, on Sci-Fi.
Okay.
I think that comes out later this year. And probably, so there's I see there's some arguments sometimes as to what is space opera and what isn't. And one of the ones...
Is it a descriptor that people like or is used pejoratively by other areas of sci-fi, right? Like it's...
Yeah, and so does it have to have spaceship laser battles in it to be considered a space opera? So one of the ones I would think of is the Asimov's Foundation series. I think there's enough going on there that I would probably consider it a space opera. Maybe a little more thoughtful than some, so it's not all space battles and lasers and Death Stars, but it's, I think, got sort of that operatic sort of theme, like tone to it. It's sweeping, big stories. What else? Can you think of any other space operas?
Yeah, I have to
Star Wars
confess
universe,
that
obviously.
yeah, I haven't read much space opera. I guess would you call Green Star space? I guess maybe not.
Well, that I mean that would fall under
Like a space exploration,
comic,
maybe.
or you know,
Yeah.
Comic.
It's comic for sure, but is there like, yeah, are you dividing space exploration versus space opera?
Yeah, because I noticed those. I mean, because
Jamie is...
I would call Star Trek.
Star Trek exploration versus...
Yeah, it would be like exploration versus space opera, Star Wars. You know.
Yeah.
What about Doctor Who, Jamie? Is that space opera?
Well, Doctor Who's time travel is Star, and it's sometimes historical fiction, and it's some of the things that people don't like about space opera. It can be. He's occasionally been Western.
Yeah,
the great thing about Doctor Who is it can be absolutely anything, and that's what keeps it fresh and exciting. And you really write any idea you ever want to write into it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's so cool. One of the things I think we were saying with the relaunch of the 2005, like the relaunch of the series, was basically if you watch the first 3 episodes of that season with Eccleston, you've basically...
Which I have in the past month. So
if you watch just those 3 episodes, if you're looking for like an introduction to Doctor Who, it's the perfect... Basically, you've now seen everything that you need to know about Doctor Who. You've got your aliens, you've got your historical fiction.
It's basically he goes to the end of our solar system.
Right.
He goes to see Charles Dickens and have some alien involvement, and he does something with an alien invasion present day in 3 episodes. It's really wonderfully done to catch everyone up who didn't grow up watching it. So.
Right. So they're not setting the expectation by having alien Dickens, and everyone's going, what the
Dickens?
What the Dickens is that?
Step that up.
So space western, the first thing that immediately jumps to mind for me with space western is not books but television, and that would be Firefly. And
which I still haven't watched, and I know I have to.
Oh, I was going to ask you.
I know.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it either.
Have you seen?
I really want to.
Have you seen the movie Serenity?
No, because you're supposed to watch the show first, right?
You don't have to, but yeah.
But you should, right? It's better that way.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, that's what my friends say.
So. The movie can be a little jarring, if you haven't seen the show, because I think of the language that they use, that sort of West End. That I think, but if you've seen the TV show and go into the movie, it's just old hat. It's old friends coming back to play for a couple hours. Highly, highly recommend that. But anybody who's spent any time on the internet probably already knows that they should watch that that show. As far as books, space western, that's a tough one. And
yeah, I mean, what's the difference between that and space opera?
What's a western?
Because it's got a western theme.
I mean, because wouldn't you call Star Wars a space western?
Hang on a second.
No, because it doesn't have a western feel at all. It's like
no, but
Star Wars is space opera.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's space opera, but I guess I just want to know what the difference
It's like it is actually like westerny feel to it, and like kind of outposty, and they're
There's some of that in Star Wars. I mean,
they're on the outer rim and stuff too. A
You
lot.
could say that
you know,
the themes are there, but the feel, I think,
yeah,
really isn't. I mean, like Firefly had that kind of Western feel to it, in the clothing and in the there's a train heist in the first aired episode, I guess, but the third episode in the series, there's it really is a Western set in space. There's and maybe you just have to watch it if I'm not doing a very good job of explaining it, and you should watch it anyway. So.
I will.
well, I think of like an anime, maybe Cowboy Bebop. If you
They
guys
did
ever
mention
seen
that in one of the lists I saw. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be a good. I guess for me, a good example of a space western.
And I couldn't get a list because the list that I pulled that had Space Western on it was from Wikipedia, not Amazon. So I couldn't click through and see what sort of the top books were.
One that actually relates to that. That I don't know. I didn't look at the definition of it, but one of the Kindle ones that relates to what you're saying with Star Wars is they have Galactic Empire as one.
Right.
So I don't know if that qualifies under that as well. Like cross-listed as these ideas with these galactic empires and something going on related to it, right?
You guys can tell I don't read that much science fiction, but what is the difference between that and space opera? I mean, isn't space opera supposed to be against a galactic empire, or am I just presuming because I've only seen
Not
Star Wars?
necessarily, because I would say again
Multiple.
the Expanse. So in the Expanse, there's no galactic empire, but there are large corporations that have their agendas, and then there are the military forces from sort of the inner planets, and Earth and Mars against the outer planets. There's this little group of people who are kind of off trying to do their thing, and they're of course the heroes of the story. There is an alien proto-molecule that's doing all kinds of terrible things to people. There's no galactic empire, but I would definitely call it space opera. There's a and so maybe part of it there are different sort of large factions, butting heads. That definitely has like the space battles and all that kind of stuff. So I think if you were going to say that it had to have the sort of an evil empire, that would kind of limit space opera quite a bit.
So it's really just more of a space adventure.
I think it
in a way.
And then there's
would you say,
adventure
like an
and sci-fi
opera
as well.
Like for anything to be an opera, I would say, what does it have to be? It probably has to be big and broad and
Right.
Maybe
Like an epic fantasy, but
yeah, like a space
in a
opera
way.
doesn't take place in Spider Robinson's bar,
Mhm.
right? If you've ever read any in Callahan's Saloon, I think it's called the bar's called. It's got to be out there. It's big. There's a lot going on. What else do we have here?
Cyberpunk is one cool one that we didn't touch on at all.
Yeah.
And so that's where you've got the visual one that everyone always talks about is Blade Runner,
Mhm.
which is going back to Philip K. Dick as well, right? So
Yeah.
William Gibson.
yeah,
and-
Yep. Neuromancer and stuff like that.
yeah.
I've never
Which
read
I-
Neuromancer, which
I honestly
know-
have to say I don't think I've read Neuromancer. I think
No.
I tried to read it many, many years ago, and for whatever reason, I'm going to have to say I don't think I got through it. Maybe I was too young, or not in the mood, who knows.
and Snow Crash, Neil Stephenson,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which I really liked. I read that actually only maybe like 3 years ago. Yeah, so
I
that's
don't know if you guys have played too many video games, but the Final Fantasy series definitely has elements of cyberpunk, especially Final Fantasy VII. You know,
I was gonna say there's other video games. What's the one? There's a video game based on role-playing game that I played back a long time ago, but it was like you were cyberjacking into systems and like going and stealing stuff that way and doing things like that.
yeah, there's a lot of that with video games. I think cyberpunk has made a bigger impact on games than probably a lot of the other science fiction genres, other than like space opera or engineering and things like that. But
What else do we have here? We've got Alien Invasion.
Yeah, which could go anywhere from
self-explanatory.
Yeah, and again, I mean, alien invasion doesn't always have to be, Mars attacks or War of the World. There's definitely an alien invasion aspect to, again, the Expanse, the Leviathan Weeks book. There's also an aspect of that to Scott Sigler's Infected. I think was the name of the first book in the series. There's 3 or 4 of those now. There's it's alien invasion of a different kind, and so maybe that's so, and those maybe that's kind of shows us a little bit of where we've moved as a culture too, where back in the day the alien invasion was the big monster spaceships coming down, Cold War, and now what's everybody's afraid of is germs, right?
Right.
So there's definitely that aspect in Sigler. These are like little things that get inside you and change your body, and that's the same. Could be said to be the same sort of idea again with the Expanse. So that alien, I think all of that alien invasion stuff it's a metaphor for something else, right?
There's another Doctor Who subgenre because Third Doctor, when he was confined to Earth in the early 70s, he had 2 seasons of every week was alien invasion, unless it was the Master working with some other aliens that were not aliens, but some other creatures that lived on Earth already that you didn't know about.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much anytime they're dealing with...
every Christmas episode is an alien invasion.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on there for sure.
And don't forget steampunk. You can't mention they're kind of 2 sides of the same coin.
With to go along with cyberpunk.
Yeah. And I've
Yeah,
always wondered.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say I don't see it listed here.
It's under. There is a
steampunk
one.
I think on
on
Wikipedia there was an other genres list, and I think on there I saw diesel punk, which they said is kind of the next step after cyberpunk, and I would have to say I haven't read any.
Or after steampunk. So it's not Age of Steam.
Picks up picks up where steampunk leaves off. So
so Age of Diesel engines, really, right?
Could diesel punk be Mad Max?
Maybe.
They're using diesel.
Yeah.
I would think that probably hits the core of the.
It could be. But again, that's post-apocalyptic anyway, right? So
it's both. Yeah, that's the thing with these genres too. They think the same thing when we were talking about the sci-fi. There's all these crossover, and that's why Amazon lets people pick more than one genre when they're putting their books up, right? Because you just kind of got to pick the best 2 that fit for what you're doing.
Right.
One that is quite different that I see on the Kindle list too is colonization. That we haven't really talked about because there's all sorts of different takes on that from.
Definitely.
Hugh Howey wrote a great colonization one called Halfway Home, which is a bit of a shorter work, so I guess it's a novella, but.
That's within our solar system or something, was it?
It's no.
Oh, that was farther. Okay.
Yeah, far, far away, and it's about a bunch of. It's a. Basically, I'm trying to think back now where people are. They're kind of like generation ships, I guess, or where you are born in a tank. Anyway, the story opens with there's something wrong with the ship. It has landed on a planet, and the ship is trying to purge these people because it's all gone wrong, or it's determined that this planet, they shouldn't be there. So all these kids basically wake up. They haven't been fully formed yet. They probably should have spent some more time in the tank learning, and they're kind of forced out into this strange alien world. So it's supposed to be about colonization, and then everything goes to hell from there.
I don't know. One I read a couple of years ago, or maybe early last year, was Ursula K. Le Guin's "The Word for World is Forest,"
Okay.
which had some definite, half of that idea is Avatar, done 30 years later, and then the other half of it is Princess Mononoke. But yeah, no, or the other half of Avatar, really. But that sort of idea, right? The humans going in and messing around with these aliens in this place and trying to learn from them, but then subjugate them or exploit them or whatever kind of stuff as well.
And I'm trying to think of where K-Pax would fall. I don't know if you haven't read the book, you might have seen the movie with Kevin Spacey.
That's an awesome movie.
because I saw
I
so
really like that
how
idea.
I got to that was I was looking at the list too, and First Contact is another
Mhm.
genre. And I mentioned earlier Agent to the Stars by Scalzi. That would definitely be a First Contact. Um, and so that K-Pax popped into my head. I don't think that would be considered First Contact, but then I don't know what it would be.
That was a. See, I like Kevin Spacey, but I really like that movie. So.
Mm-hmm. That's and Cocoon. That would be it. Again, we're talking about a movie there, but and it probably was a book. I'm sure you guys have both seen that great
I
old
haven't.
movie with no.
No.
That's going back a ways too. So
Yeah.
80s.
When you said that, it makes me think of Last Starfighter because it was around the same time.
Yeah, we could definitely do a whole episode on the movies, and we're also coming up on 50 minutes.
Yeah.
So we should probably take a quick look through here and see if there's anything we want to hit before we wrap it up.
A lot of sci-fi, but it's interesting. Like some of them, like you think, man, like what would it even be? Like what would you count? What would you call Ender's Game? It's such a blend of some of these different things.
Military.
It's like military sci-fi adventure.
Yeah, but it's really
coming of age.
Him and it's really the coming of age, but then the social commentary, and then right, like there's all sorts of cool stuff. Like it's again, that's great. Like, that's what makes it so great and loved and stuff. Is I think the more of these different aspects that a book can appeal to without alienating someone, there you go as a bestseller, right?
And then you end up, you're not just putting kind of sticking something into these kinds of genres. Sort of another book that I know I've mentioned before, Ailey Martinez, The Automatic Detective, which is definitely science fiction. It's about a robot that was built for terrible purpose, who is now a private detective, and it's a very kind of noirish story. So there you've got a mashing of not just two genres within science fiction, but two completely different genres, or I guess like a genre that's more a tone than anything else, with noir and sticking it in a science fiction world, and that's a great story. Cool. Nothing else. I don't know why high tech would be a category on Amazon.
Yeah, it's just weird.
I don't know what the difference there would be between that and
hard sci-fi.
I guess I could see I could see that there could be high tech and low tech and
but it's so weird to see that as a category when there's like these 15 others that aren't in the that's like the hard book cover, like the hard book category, right? So I don't know, someone weird came up with that idea.
And that might be the difference between the high hard and soft
that categories, whatever, and the
yeah. So I bet The Martian's probably in high tech somewhere.
Now you're gonna go check, aren't you?
No. I might read it again. I might read it again, though.
Yeah, there you go.
I might have to read that one again before the movie comes out. We'll see. I'll either read it again before I go see the movie, which I hope is.
Fine, we'll read it. We'll read it, okay?
or I'll see the movie and then reread the book.
Yeah. Okay.
So at least go see the movie. Matt Damon. I like Matt Damon.
I do too.
Hopefully it's good. So we'll wrap it up here.
I just want to make one final comment that has nothing to do with this, and that's one of my favorite authors passed away at the end of last week, and that was Colleen McCullough, who wrote that Masters of Rome series that is something that helped me fall in love with historical fiction and especially Rome. Can't recommend it enough. It's 7 books going from basically the late days of the Republic, from the time of Gaius Marius through Sulla, through Caesar, through Pompey and Augustus, and like until the Empire the Empire began. But she was 77, passed away at her massive house on Norfolk Island, which is an Australian possession northeast of Australia into the South Pacific. But she's best known for her Thornbirds, which was a mega hit, romantic historic fiction in Australia that she wrote in the 70s. And she also wrote Tim, that was made into a movie with Mel Gibson back in the 70s. That was her first novel. But I learned a lot from reading her bios and stuff. Like she was a scientist. She was a doctor, and she taught at Yale before she even started writing. So really impressive woman that did a lot of amazing stuff. And there's some really good obituaries of her, and then there's one from the Australian that Neil Gaiman panned pretty publicly on Twitter, and it's pretty horrible. Like, I think he basically said,
Oh,
if this, yeah, what was it, that if you probably could have made a more offensive first few paragraphs of this obituary, but I'm not sure how.
I think I know the obituary you're talking about, so we won't go into it, but I'm pretty sure I saw it, yeah.
That just bothered me. So
I saw the obituary and I didn't make the connection to, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so she passed away at the age of 77 on Friday, and so she will be missed, at least in this part of the TBR podcast.
So with that not so upbeat note, we'll
sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at tbrpodcast@gmail.com if you'd like to get in touch. And also be sure to visit our Goodreads page. The link, I think I forgot to put it in the show notes, but we can drop it in the comments. Next week, we're going to talk about what to do when you're in a reading slump. And we will talk to you then. You guys have a great week.
Take care.
Happy reading.